In 2023, Officer Daniel Reeves wasn't looking for ghosts. He was cleaning. The Black Ridge Police Department in East Texas was upgrading its digital system, which meant someone had to sort through the old archive room, a narrow concrete basement stacked with dusty boxes and labeled cassette tapes from the 90s. Reeves drew the short straw. Most of it was routine. Drunk driving stops, domestic disputes, noise complaints, nothing worth remembering. Until he found a tape that wasn't cataloged correctly. It was labeled in fading ink, 911, June 17, 1996, 2:13 a.m. Reeves frowned. He had already processed the logs from that week. There was no call recorded at 2:13 a.m. on June 17th. According to official records, the department received 0 emergency calls between 1:48 a.m. and 3:02 a.m. that night. Still, the tape existed. Curiosity got the better of him. He carried it upstairs and placed it into one of the few remaining cassette players still hooked into the system. The audio crackled to life, low quality, distorted, like it had been copied more than once. Then he heard breathing, soft, uneven. A girl's voice came next, barely above a whisper. "Hello? I think he's inside the walls." The dispatcher's voice never responded.
There was no greeting, no operator ID, no standard protocol, just silence. The girl spoke again. "I can hear him breathing. It's not the house settling, he's moving." Reeves felt a chill creep up his neck, because he recognized the address she whispered seconds later. 1478 Willow Creek Road. Everyone in Black Ridge remembered that address. That was the Mercer house. 3 members of the Mercer family had died there in what investigators ruled an accidental electrical fire. But not on June 17. The fire happened on June 14, 1996, 3 days before this call was supposedly made. Reeves immediately pulled the original case file. The coroner's report confirmed the time of death, approximately 11:40 p.m. on June 14. Smoke inhalation. All 3 bodies were recovered from the living room. The house had burned fast, violently. So how could someone have called 911 from inside it 3 days later? Reeves rewound the tape, listened again. At the 47-second mark, something else surfaced under the static. A second sound. Not the girl, not the line distortion. It was faint, but rhythmic. Breathing. Not through a phone. Closer. Like whoever was listening to the tape was standing inside the walls themselves.
He walked the roster down to Chief Alvarez, who had been a rookie patrol officer back in the 90s. Alvarez studied the sheet quietly. "That can't be right," he muttered. "I remember Martha. Sweet lady. Always brought peppermint candy to dispatch." Reeves placed the cassette on the desk. "She's listed as active at 2:13 a.m. Alvarez stared at it like it might move. "Play it." They listened together in the chief's office. The same static, the same uneven breathing, the same frightened whisper. "He's inside the walls." Reeves watched Alvarez carefully. The chief's jaw tightened when the address was spoken. He remembered the Mercer fire, too. Small-town tragedies don't fade, they sink into the soil. When the tape ended, neither man spoke for several seconds. Finally, Alvarez said, "Run the metadata." The IT technician extracted what little digital imprint remained from the tape's conversion record. The timestamp embedded in the archive system confirmed it had been logged into evidence storage on June 18, 1996, 1 day after the supposed call. That meant someone physically submitted it and someone signed for it.
Reeves found the signature in the intake ledger. The name was barely legible, but it wasn't Martha Caldwell. It was Deputy Harold Kessler. Kessler had been the first officer on scene at the Mercer fire. He was also dead, killed in a highway collision in 2002. Reeves leaned back in his chair.
Two deceased names attached to a call that officially never happened. He pulled the original fire investigation file again and dug deeper into Kessler's notes. That's when he noticed something odd. The incident report stated that the fire originated inside the living room wall cavity, not from a visible outlet, but from inside the insulation itself. Electrical malfunction, the report claimed, but there was no detailed follow-up on how wiring inside that section could have ignited so suddenly. Just a brief line, possible rodent damage. Reeves felt the pieces pressing together in ways he didn't like. A girl whispering about someone inside the walls, a fire that started inside the walls, a deputy who logged a mysterious tape and never mentioned it again, and a dispatcher who wasn't alive to answer the phone. That's when Reeves made a decision. He drove out to Willow Creek Road. The Mercer house still stood, boarded up, windows dark, lawn overtaken by weeds. The city council had scheduled demolition for the following week. Reeves stepped out of his cruiser and stared at the quiet structure. For a house that had burned nearly 30 years ago, it looked too intact, too preserved, like it was waiting. As he approached the front porch, his radio crackled unexpectedly, static. Then a faint sound slipped through. Not a voice, not words, just slow, steady breathing. And it wasn't coming from the radio speaker. It was coming from the house. But when Reeves stepped closer to the wall, he heard something else moving inside. Reeves froze halfway up the porch steps. The sound wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, the kind of noise you question before you admit you heard it. A slow drag, then a faint thud from inside the wall. The house had been empty for nearly 3 decades, power disconnected, utilities stripped, no recorded trespassing incidents in the past 5 years. And yet something shifted behind the drywall, like insulation being pressed from within. Reeves drew his flashlight and sidearm, pushing open the loose plywood covering the front door. The wood scraped against the frame as he stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Not rot, not smoke, dust. Dry, undisturbed dust layered thick over the floor like no one had walked through it in years. His boots left the only fresh tracks. The living room ceiling still carried smoke stains from the fire. The walls had been partially replaced in 1996 during structural stabilization, but the interior framing remained original. He stood in the exact place where the Mercer family's bodies had been found. According to the report, they were discovered together, not scattered, not trying to escape, together. That detail had always bothered older officers. Reeves turned slowly. The sound came again, closer now, a faint scratching, uneven and desperate, muffled by layers of drywall and insulation. He stepped toward the north wall, the same wall listed in the fire report as the ignition point. He pressed his palm flat against it, cold, still. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, a soft vibration tapped against his hand from inside. 3 knocks, slow, measured. Reeves jerked back. His pulse pounded in his ears. He told himself it had to be animals, raccoons maybe. The house backed into wooded acreage. But animals don't knock in patterns. He circled the room, scanning for any visible breach points. There were none. No chew holes, no gaps large enough for wildlife to nest. And the sound wasn't coming from near the floor. It was shoulder height. Human height. Reeves keyed his radio.
Dispatch, this is Officer Reeves. I'm at 1478 Willow Creek. Possible trespasser inside wall cavity, requesting backup. Static answered him. Then, a faint whisper crackled through the speaker. Not dispatch protocol, not a response code, just 3 words. He's still here. Reeves felt every muscle in his body lock. The voice wasn't distorted like old cassette audio. It was clear, young, terrified. The same voice from the tape. He slowly turned toward the north wall again. This time, the scratching intensified. Not random now, deliberate. Long, dragging pulls like fingernails carving through something dense. The drywall trembled slightly. Dust sifted down from the seam near the ceiling. Reeves stepped closer despite every instinct telling him to leave. He leaned his ear toward the surface. That's when he heard it clearly. Breathing. Not through vents, not from the attic, from inside the insulation. And beneath the breathing, another sound. A second set. Slower, heavier. Reeves backed away slowly because whatever was in there were 2 of them. And one of them wasn't trying to get out. It was trying to stay hidden. But when demolition crews opened that wall days later, what they uncovered would prove this wasn't just a haunting, it was something far worse. Reeves didn't tell the full truth in his report. He logged it as possible structural disturbance and pushed for expedited demolition. Officially, the Mercer house was a safety hazard. Unofficially, he didn't want another night standing in that living room, listening to something breathe behind drywall. 3 days later, a city-contracted demolition crew rolled onto Willow Creek Road with a backhoe and a 2-man interior team. Reeves insisted on being present.
The foreman, a broad-shouldered guy named Tate, joked about haunted houses as they unloaded equipment. Reeves didn't laugh. They started with the roof, peeling back charred shingles and weakened beams. Sunlight poured into the skeleton of the house, exposing blackened studs and decades-old smoke scars. Nothing unusual, until they reached the north wall, the same section where the fire allegedly started. Tate signaled for the interior team to cut into it manually before bringing in heavy machinery. A circular saw bit into the drywall. Dust exploded outward. The first panel dropped with a hollow crack. Then everyone went quiet. The insulation wasn't normal. Instead of fluffy yellow batting, large sections were compressed inward, like something had repeatedly pushed against it from inside. Not chewed, pressed. Tate pulled more material away with gloved hands. That's when they saw the marks. Long grooves carved into the wooden studs. Not shallow scratches, deep gouges, parallel lines, some over a foot long. Reeves stepped closer. The grooves were uneven, frantic, starting low, climbing higher toward the center of the wall, as if someone had been trapped and tried to claw their way upward. One of the workers muttered, "That's not animals." Because animals don't scratch vertically at shoulder height, and they don't leave patterns that look like fingernails splitting against wood.
Reeves crouched down to examine the insulation more closely. He noticed something else embedded in the fibers. Fabric. Burned at the edges, but still visible. Pink cotton. Torn. Threadbare. He felt a cold wave pass through him. According to old family photos in the case file, the Mercer daughter, Emily Mercer, age 12, had been wearing pink pajamas the night of the fire. The official report stated all 3 bodies were recovered from the living room floor.
No one had been inside the walls. No one had gone missing. Tate pulled back another slab of insulation. More scratch marks appeared, denser now, layered over each other. Like multiple attempts, like time had passed between them. Then one of the crew members froze. Boss?" He pointed deeper into the cavity. Reeves leaned in. Something white was wedged between two studs. Small, curved. At first it looked like debris, until he realized what he was staring at. It was a fingernail. Humans. Still attached to a fragment of dried tissue. Silence swallowed the room, because that meant one thing. Someone hadn't died in the living room. Someone had been alive inside this wall.
And they had tried to get out. But that wasn't the most disturbing discovery, because when forensics arrived and matched the DNA, it didn't belong to Emily Mercer. And the identity it did match would tear open a secret Blackridge had buried for 30 years. The fingernail fragment was sealed, tagged, and rushed to the state lab in Tyler. Reeves expected confirmation of what everyone already feared, that it belonged to Emily Mercer. He was wrong. 2 days later, the lab technician called personally instead of sending routine paperwork. That alone told him something wasn't normal. "We got a match," she said. Reeves tightened his grip on the phone. "To the Mercer family?" "No," she replied, "not even close." The DNA profile matched a missing persons case from 1995, a 15-year-old girl named Leila Harper. Reported missing 11 months before the Mercer fire. Last seen leaving a grocery store in Blackridge. Case status unresolved. Reeves felt the floor tilt beneath him. He pulled Leila's file immediately. Blonde hair, brown eyes, sophomore at Blackridge High, no history of running away, no known enemies. Her disappearance had gone cold within months. And here was her DNA, inside the walls of a house that burned down the following year. That meant Leila had been there before the fire, not after. Before. Reeves drove to the Harper residence, now occupied by Lila's older brother, Grant. Their parents had both passed away within the last decade. Grant opened the door cautiously when Reeves introduced himself. When he heard his sister's name, his face drained of color. "You found something," he said quietly. Reeves explained carefully, the wall, the scratch marks, the lab result. Grant gripped the edge of the doorframe as if steadying himself. "She hated tight spaces," he whispered. "Wouldn't even crawl under the bed to grab things." Reeves swallowed. The implication was brutal. Grant stepped aside and disappeared into another room, returning with a faded photograph. Lila was wearing pink pajama pants in it. Reeves stared at the image. The same soft cotton fabric found burned inside the Mercer wall cavity. But Lila had vanished nearly a year before the fire, which raised a question no one in Blackridge had ever asked. Why had a missing teenager been inside the Mercer house? Reeves dug back into the 1996 fire investigation, this time reading between the lines instead of accepting the summary. Deputy Harold Kessler had been first on scene. Kessler had also logged the mysterious 911 tape. Kessler had signed off on the structural fire origin without requesting deeper wall excavation. And Kessler had closed Lila Harper's missing persons case. Reeves leaned back in his chair. One man connected all three threads: missing girl, fire inside the walls, unlogged 911 call. Kessler died in 2002 when his patrol car veered off Highway 19 and struck a guardrail. Single vehicle accident, no witnesses,
Case closed. Reeves reopened the collision report. There was a note buried in the mechanical assessment. Brake line failure, but no explanation for what caused it. He stared at the words, because if Lila Harper had been trapped inside those walls, and if someone knew she was there, then the Mercer fire might not have been an accident. It might have been a cover.
And if that was true, then the voice on that 911 tape wasn't calling for help during a haunting. She was calling while someone was still alive in that house. And the next discovery would reveal that Lila wasn't the only one who had been hidden behind those walls. Reeves returned to the Mercer property before sunrise. Demolition had been paused pending further investigation, leaving the house partially gutted, ribs exposed, insulation spilling from torn seams. Crime scene tape fluttered in the cold morning wind. He stepped through the opening where the north wall once stood. Forensics had removed the visible evidence, but Reeves wasn't satisfied. The scratch marks had been concentrated in one vertical section between two studs. Too concentrated. Like whoever had been trapped there wasn't randomly inside the wall. They were confined. He crouched down and examined the base framing more closely. That's when he noticed something off. The spacing between two support studs was wider than standard residential framing from the 80s, nearly 4 inches wider. And the bottom plate had been reinforced, not during the fire repair, but originally. Reeves ran his flashlight along the cavity. There was a secondary panel behind the insulation, a thin sheet of plywood nailed horizontally hidden between structural supports. It wasn't part of normal construction. It was intentional. He called in the forensic team again and had them remove the remaining material carefully. When the plywood panel came free, a hollow pocket was revealed behind it, not large enough to stand, but large enough to hold someone. The interior space was barely 3 feet deep and 4 feet tall, and inside that cavity, the wood was covered in markings, not just scratches, words, carved with something sharp, overlapping, desperate. Reeves leaned closer. "I'm still here. Please. It's dark." The carving grew frantic near the top. "He won't let me out." Reeves felt his throat tighten. At the bottom corner of the cavity, wedged near the baseboard, they found something else. A small plastic keychain flashlight, melted on one side. The battery compartment was empty. The brand logo was still faintly visible.
Reeves recognized it immediately. The same promotional flashlight was given away at the 1995 Black Ridge County Fair. He checked Lila Harper's missing persons file again. Last known location before she vanished? The county fair. That meant she had likely been taken that night and hidden inside this house for nearly a year, alive. Reeves' mind raced. If Lila had been imprisoned in that cavity before the fire, someone had built it deliberately. Someone who had access to the Mercer house. But the Mercers themselves died in the blaze. Unless they weren't victims. Unless they were silenced. Reeves requested excavation beneath the floorboards directly below the hidden space. When the crew pried up the charred planks, a metallic glint caught the light. A chain. Bolted into the concrete foundation. The end was broken, as if something or someone had pulled against it with enough force to snap it loose. Reeves stared at the fractured metal, because that meant at some point whoever had been chained there had gotten free, which raised a new, terrifying possibility. What if Lila hadn't died in the fire? What if she had escaped the wall before the flames spread? And if she did, who made that 911 call 3 days after the house burned? Because according to the coroner's report, only 3 bodies were recovered.
But after finding that hidden cavity, Reeves wasn't so sure that count had ever been accurate. And what they would uncover beneath the foundation would prove the fire wasn't the only secret buried at Willow Creek Road. The excavation crew didn't speak much after the chain was found. The mood had shifted. This wasn't demolition anymore. It was a recovery. Reeves stood near the edge of the exposed living room floor as workers broke apart the concrete slab beneath the hidden cavity. Each strike of the jackhammer echoed through the hollow shell of the house. Dust clouded the air, then the bit punched through. There was empty space below, not soil, not solid fill, a void. Reeves crouched and shined his flashlight through the opening. The beam revealed disturbed earth, darker than the surrounding clay, loose, recently turned compared to the compacted ground around it, even after 30 years. He felt a heaviness settle in his chest. "Careful," he told the crew. They widened the opening by hand, shovels scraping cautiously through dirt. It didn't take long. The first bone surfaced less than a foot down. A forearm, small, delicate. Forensics was called back again. The site transformed into a controlled dig by late afternoon. Crime scene tents went up. Photographs were taken from every angle. By evening, they had uncovered remains. Not one body.
2. Both positioned directly beneath the hidden wall cavity. One skeleton appeared smaller, likely female, adolescent. The second was larger, adult, male. Reeves stared at the second set of remains longer than he meant to, because this wasn't in any report. 3 bodies had been recovered from the Mercer fire, not 5. He pulled the original autopsy summaries again. 3 confirmed victims, Thomas Mercer, his wife Dana Mercer, and their daughter Emily. No unidentified remains, which meant either the fire destroyed evidence of 2 additional bodies, unlikely given the intact condition of the original 3, or someone had buried them before the blaze. The forensic anthropologist made a preliminary observation. "The smaller one likely died from blunt force trauma," she said quietly. "Skull fracture." Reeves swallowed. "And the other?" She hesitated. "Gunshot wound to the back of the skull. Execution style." Reeves' mind raced. If Lila Harper had been imprisoned in that wall, chained beneath the floor, then she either died before the fire or during it. But this grave was under a solid foundation, which meant it had been dug before the house burned, and someone had taken the time to pour concrete back over it, someone who lived there, or someone who had access long enough to modify the structure. Reeves requested dental comparison on the adolescent remains. Within 24 hours, confirmation came. The smaller skeleton was Lila Harper. She had never made it out. The 911 call could not have been from her.
Which left one impossible question hanging in the air. Who made the call 3 days after the fire? Because Lila died before the blaze ever started. Reeves stepped outside the house that evening as the sun dipped behind the trees. The wind moved through the broken frame, producing a low, hollow sound, almost like breathing. He looked back at the exposed cavity in the wall. If Lila had been murdered and buried beneath the floor before the fire, then someone else had been alive in that house during the flames, someone unaccounted for. And when Reeves reviewed the Mercer family's background deeper than anyone had in 1996, he found a detail that changed everything. Because Thomas Mercer wasn't the original owner of that house, and the man who built it vanished without a trace in 1989. But the records tied that missing builder to something far darker than anyone in Blackridge was prepared to face. Thomas Mercer bought the house on Willow Creek Road in 1992, but he didn't build it. The original construction permit from 1987 listed a different name, Caleb Rourke. Reeves had never heard it before, but older property records showed Rourke purchased the land outright in 1986 and personally oversaw much of the construction. No contractor company, no subcontracted crew, he built it himself. In 1989, Caleb Rourke disappeared. No missing persons report was ever officially filed. According to tax documents, the property transferred to the bank 2 years later after foreclosure proceedings began. Neighbors at the time told police Rourke was quiet and kept to himself. One statement mentioned he worked nights and boarded up windows during the day. Another neighbor claimed she heard hammering inside the house long after construction was supposedly complete.
Reeves requested archived patrol logs from 1987 to 1989. There were 2 welfare checks conducted on the property, both triggered by reports of screaming coming from inside. Officers at the time noted no signs of distress. Reeves stared at that line for a long moment. No signs of distress. He flipped through the old incident photos attached to those checks. In one grainy image taken from the front yard, a section of the house near the north wall looked newly patched, repaired, even though the house was less than 2 years old. Reeves felt a slow dread building. If Caleb Rourke designed and built that hidden cavity himself, then the structure wasn't a last-minute addition. It was part of the original blueprint. He requested the archived architectural plans from the county office. The official layout showed standard framing, no concealed compartments, no unusual stud spacing, which meant the hidden chamber wasn't permitted. It was improvised during construction, carefully concealed. Reeves dug deeper into Rourke's background. He had worked briefly as a maintenance technician at Black Ridge High School in 1985, the same school Leila Harper attended a decade later. There was no direct connection, at least none on paper. But another detail caught Reeves' attention. Rourke had been questioned in 1988 regarding the disappearance of a local drifter named Marcus Hale. Hale was last seen asking for work near Willow Creek Road. No body was ever recovered.
The case went cold. Reeves' eyes drifted back to the forensic report from beneath the Mercer Foundation. 2 bodies had been found. One confirmed as Leila Harper. The second, adult male. Gunshot wound to the back of the skull. Estimated time of death, late 1980s, before the Mercers ever bought the house. Which meant Caleb Rourke likely buried Marcus Hale beneath his own living room floor. And if he built a hidden chamber inside the wall, he hadn't intended to use it just once. Reeves leaned back in his chair, piecing it together. Rourke disappeared in 1989. The house sits empty. Mercers bought it in 1992. Leila vanished in 1995. Fire destroyed the house in 1996. Someone wanted that structure erased. But the biggest question remained untouched. If Caleb Rourke was responsible for the original hidden chamber, what happened to him? Because no remains matching Rourke were found beneath that house. Not on the wall, not under the floor. And when Reeves pulled Rourke's last known employment records, he discovered something that made the timeline twist even tighter. Rourke had briefly worked as a volunteer firefighter in Black Ridge, and he responded to house fires, including one in June of 1996, the Mercer Fire.
But the official responder list for that night didn't include his name, even though witnesses swore they saw him there. The official responder list from June 14, 1996 was clean. Too clean. 6 firefighters, 2 deputies, 1 ambulance crew. He started with retired fire captain Leonard Briggs. Briggs answered the door with a cane in one hand and suspicion in his eyes. When Reeves mentioned the Mercer fire, the old man's jaw tightened. "That house," Briggs muttered. "I still smell it sometimes." Reeves asked him directly, "Was Caleb Rourke there that night?" Briggs didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past Reeves toward the street like he expected someone to be listening. "He wasn't on the roster," Briggs finally said, "but I remember seeing him in the yard." Reeves kept his voice steady. "Doing what?" "Watching." The word hung in the air. Briggs explained that Rourke showed up halfway through suppression efforts. He wasn't in gear, no helmet, no turnout coat, just standing near the tree line. "He told me he used to own the place," Briggs said he wanted to see how bad it was. "Did anyone question why he was there?" Briggs shook his head slowly. "Small town, people drift in and out. We were focused on the fire." Reeves pressed further. "Did you see him leave?" Briggs hesitated. "No." That silence said more than any statement. Reeves cross-referenced other witness accounts from archived interviews. Most were short, routine, and procedural. But one handwritten note from a volunteer EMT caught his eye. "Male subject near back of property. Mud on boots. It smelled like gasoline." The name field was left blank. No follow-up questions recorded. Reeves exhaled slowly. If Rourke was present that night, off the record, then he had access during the chaos. Fire creates confusion. Movement goes unnoticed. And if someone needed to make sure certain evidence disappeared, a fire would do the job. But it hadn't erased everything. Because 3 days after the blaze, that 911 call was recorded, dated June 17th, after the structure had already been declared unstable and sealed off. Reeves drove to the old telecom substation on the edge of town, where archived call routing data was stored on microfilm. The technician on duty helped him locate June 1996 routing logs. Most entries were mundane, until they reached 2:13 a.m. on June 17th. There it was. An outgoing signal pinged from a landline registered to 1478 Willow Creek Road. Duration, 58 seconds. Which meant the call wasn't fabricated. It physically originated from that house, 3 days after it burned. Reeves felt his pulse quicken. He pulled the service status report for that address. The line was officially disconnected on June 15th at 9:42 a.m., cut by utility crews due to fire damage.
Which meant the line should not have been capable of transmitting a call on June 17th, and yet it did. Reeves stared at the routing log again, because beneath the call duration was something else, a secondary signal overlap, another line piggybacking the same connection, an internal extension. The Mercer house didn't have an internal extension registered, unless someone had installed one privately. And if that was true, then someone had been inside that burned house 3 days later, using a hidden line, whispering about something breathing inside the walls. But when Reeves checked property surveillance reports from neighboring houses during that time frame, he found something that made his blood run cold. Because a motion-activated camera across the street had captured a figure entering the Mercer property on June 17th at 2:09 a.m. And that figure wasn't a teenage girl. It was a grown man carrying something heavy toward the back of the house. The security footage came from a neighbor's old camcorder system, primitive by today's standards, but functional in 1996. It had been installed after a string of mailbox thefts in the area. Most of the tapes were long degraded, but one clip from June 17th had survived. Timestamp, 2:09 a.m., 4 minutes before the 911 call. Reeves watched the grainy black and white video in the evidence room, lights off, screen glow reflecting across his face. The Mercer house stood dark in the background, windows boarded, roof partially collapsed from the fire damage. Then movement entered the frame from the right. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like a work jacket and boots. He moved quickly, but not frantically. Over his right shoulder, he carried something long and wrapped in what appeared to be fabric. It wasn't struggling, it wasn't moving, but it wasn't small either. Reeves leaned closer to the screen. The man paused near the side of the house, exactly where the hidden wall cavity had been discovered decades later. He adjusted the weight on his shoulder, then disappeared behind the structure. The timestamp advanced, 2:12 a.m. 1 minute later, faint light flickered inside the house, brief, like a flashlight switching on. At 2:13 a.m., the 911 call was placed. Reeves rewound the clip repeatedly, frame by frame, trying to sharpen details. The man's face was mostly obscured by shadow, but when he shifted under the porch light for half a second, something became visible. A patch on his jacket, circular, with faint reflective lettering. Reeves froze the frame and enhanced it digitally. The letters were barely legible, but he could make out enough. BFRD, Black Ridge Fire Rescue Department. His pulse pounded. Caleb Rourke had once volunteered with BFRD, and though he wasn't officially listed as a responder that night, witnesses placed him at the fire. Reeves cross-referenced old department records. Volunteer gear was rarely reclaimed when members left, which meant Rourke could still have had access to that jacket years later. The timeline clicked into place. Rourke appears during the fire. 3 days later, someone returns to the burned structure, carries something inside. A call is made describing breathing within the walls. Then, silence. Reeves pulled up Rourke's driver's license photo from 1988. He compared it to the still image from the security footage. Even through the distortion, the jawline matched. So did the posture.
But there was something else. As the man stepped toward the back of the house, he briefly turned his head toward the camera. For a split second, his face caught the porch light, and Reeves saw it clearly. It wasn't fear. I didn't panic. It was calm, deliberate, like someone finishing unfinished business. Reeves leaned back in his chair, mind racing. If Rourke had returned to the Mercer house on June 17th, what was he carrying? And who made the 911 call? Because the voice on that tape was young, frightened, very much alive. And if Leela Harper had already been dead before the fire, then someone else had been inside that house 3 days later. Someone who believed something was breathing in the walls. Reeves checked one final detail before leaving the station that night. Property tax transfers after the fire. The Mercer land was auctioned quietly in late 1996, purchased under a corporate LLC. Registered agent, C. Rourke. But the address tied to that LLC wasn't local. It was out of state. And when Reeves searched for any official death certificate for Caleb Rourke, there wasn't one. He had never been declared dead. He had simply vanished again. But when Reeves tracked the LLC's financial records, he discovered the land on Willow Creek had never truly changed hands, and someone had been paying to keep it untouched for 30 years. The LLC was called Willow Holdings, Inc., registered in Louisiana, formed August 1996, 2 months after the Mercer fire. Registered agent, Caleb Rourke. Reeves requested financial disclosures through state records. The corporation had one asset, 1478 Willow Creek Road. Property taxes had been paid on time every single year. No development, no resale attempts, no renovation permits, just preservation. As if someone wanted the land frozen in time. Reeves dug deeper into the payment trail.
Taxes were paid through cashier's checks mailed from different cities over the years. Baton Rouge, Mobile, Pensacola. Never the same location twice. Careful, deliberate. But the handwriting on the check memos remained consistent. Block letters, neat, controlled. Reeves compared the scanned copies to Caleb Rourke's signature from his 1987 building permit. The formation of the capital R matched. So did the spacing between letters. Rourke hadn't vanished. He'd relocated. And he'd been watching. Reeves requested traffic camera archives from surrounding highways on June 17, 1996. Limited footage existed, but one still image from a tow booth 30 miles south caught his attention. 2:58 a.m. A pickup truck passed through heading toward Louisiana. Registered owner, Caleb Rourke. That meant Rourke was in Black Ridge the night of the mysterious 911 call. He entered the burned property at 2:09 a.m. A call originated from inside at 2:13 a.m. He left town less than an hour later. Reeves replayed the 911 tape again in the evidence room. This time he focused on the background noise behind the girl's whisper. There it was, a faint metallic clink, rhythmic, like chains against concrete. He closed his eyes and listened carefully. Between her words, another sound bled through the static, a low voice, not speaking clearly, but humming, soft, almost soothing, like someone trying to calm a frightened child. Reeves felt a cold realization settle in. The girl wasn't alone during that call. Someone was in the room with her. And if the internal extension line had been installed privately, that meant Rourke could control which calls were logged and which weren't, unless something interrupted him. Reeves zoomed in to the final seconds of the security footage again. Just before the light inside the house flickered off, a shadow crossed the window, small, much smaller than the man who entered. The shape moved quickly, then vanished from the frame. Reeves' heart pounded.
The Mercer daughter, Emily, was 12 when she died in the fire, but her body had been found in the living room, according to the report. He reopened the autopsy file for Emily Mercer. The time of death was estimated between 11:30 p.m. and midnight on June 14. Cause, smoke inhalation. But something stood out. There was no mention of soot in her lungs beyond moderate levels, less than her parents', which meant she may not have been alive long during the fire. And there was a small bruise noted on the back of her skull, not emphasized, not investigated. Reeves stared at the photo from the autopsy, then at the wall cavity images, then at the security footage. If Rourke returned on June 17 carrying something, and if a smaller shadow moved inside that house just before the 911 call, then the voice on that tape might not have belonged to Lila Harper. It might have belonged to Emily Mercer. And if Emily survived the fire, then someone took her back inside that burned house 3 days later. But the final enhancement of the 911 recording would reveal something even more disturbing, because the breathing in the walls didn't belong to a trapped victim. Reeves sent the original cassette to a private forensic audio lab in Dallas. He didn't want a routine cleanup. He wanted everything extracted, every layer of noise, every hidden frequency buried under the static. 3 days later, the enhanced file arrived. He locked himself in the evidence room and put on headphones. The difference was immediate. The distortion was thinner now, the girl's whisper clearer. "He's inside the walls. I can hear him breathing." Reeves focused on the breathing track the lab had isolated. It wasn't random noise. It was structured, measured. The technician's notes were blunt. 2 distinct respiratory patterns detected. One matched a young adolescent female under stress, shallow, rapid,
uneven. The other was slower, controlled, adult male. Approximately 12 to 14 breaths per minute. Too steady for panic, too calm for someone trapped. Reeves rewound to the 22-second mark. The girl's voice trembled.
He's moving again. Underneath that, the second breathing pattern shifted slightly closer to the microphone, not behind the wall, near her. He felt a cold certainty settle in. She wasn't hearing someone inside the walls. She was being made to believe that. The lab enhancement picked up something else near the end of the call. A faint scraping noise, followed by 3 knocks. Not from within drywall, from something hollow, wooden. Reeves compared it to the recorded vibration captured on his body cam during the demolition day when he felt the tapping inside the north wall. The acoustic profile didn't match. The tapping in 2023 came from insulation and studs. The knocking in 1996 echoed differently, like it was coming from a confined wooden compartment. Reeves compared the architectural notes again. The hidden cavity had plywood backing, and beneath it, a chain bolted into concrete. He closed his eyes and replayed the enhanced audio one more time. The final seconds of the call had always cut abruptly. Now, with the cleaned version, he heard what came just before the line went dead. The girl gasped, not from fear, from impact. A sudden shift in air. Then a low male whisper, so faint it was nearly lost in the noise. "It's okay. It's almost over." The call terminated immediately after. No disconnect tone, no operator sign-off. Reeves removed the headphones slowly. If the voice belonged to Emily Mercer, then she survived the fire. Rourke returned on June 17th, carrying something into that house, possibly her. The shadow in the security footage, the calm breathing in the recording, the whispered reassurance. This wasn't a haunting, it was staged. He made her believe someone was inside the walls. He made her call 911, but the call never logged through official dispatch, which meant Rourke controlled the line. Reeves felt the pieces finally align. Rourke built the hidden chamber, buried a victim beneath the floor, watched the Mercer house burn, returned days later, and finished something he started. But one detail refused to fit. Because when forensic teams excavated beneath the foundation, they found 2 bodies. Lila Harper, Marcus Hale. They never found Emily Mercer, and her remains were never re-examined after 1996, which meant one horrifying possibility remained. Emily Mercer might not be dead. And when Reeves ran her DNA against unidentified remains databases nationwide, one match came back from a hospital admission just 6 years ago. The DNA match came from a hospital in Baton Rouge, admitted under the name Evelyn Moore in 2017, age listed 33, no next of kin. Treated for dehydration and minor head trauma after being found wandering near a highway rest stop. Fingerprints had been taken as part of intake protocol. Those prints were never flagged until Reeves reran Emily Mercer's childhood dental and medical records through the national database. The match probability was 98.7%, close enough to erase coincidence. Reeves flew to Louisiana the next morning. The hospital records showed Evelyn Moore had been transferred briefly to a psychiatric evaluation unit before discharging herself against medical advice. No permanent address, no employment history that held longer than a few months. A pattern of relocation every year or 2. Always southern states, always small towns. Reeves traced the most recent address on file, a rented duplex outside Lafayette. The landlord confirmed Evelyn moved out abruptly 6 months ago, left most of her belongings behind. Reeves stepped inside the empty unit with permission. The place smelled stale. Bare walls, minimal furniture impressions in the carpet. But in the back bedroom closet, he found something taped to the interior drywall. A torn piece of paper, covered in handwriting. I can hear him breathing. The letters were uneven, shaky, pressed hard enough to tear the page. Reeves felt his chest tighten. He searched the rest of the room.
Inside the closet corner, faint scratch marks marred the paint near shoulder height. Not deep, not frantic, but deliberate, as if someone had needed to feel the barrier in front of them. He requested copies of Evelyn Moore's psychiatric evaluation notes. The attending physician documented recurring night terrors. The subject reports auditory hallucinations involving movement inside walls. Believes someone watches from hidden spaces. Avoids sleeping near drywall. Prefers center of room. One line in the notes stood out. Patient states, "He told me it would be over after the fire." Reeves stared at that sentence for a long time. After the fire. Which meant she remembered it. She remembered surviving. The hospital intake photo showed a faint scar near her hairline, right where Emily Mercer's autopsy report had noted a bruise in 1996. If Emily survived the fire, Rourke could have removed her before authorities secured the scene. Chaos makes disappearances easier, especially in a town that already believed everyone inside had died. Reeves dug into Rourke's financial activity around 1996, a withdrawal of $4,000 in cash 2 days before the fire. Another $3,000 the day after the 911 call, enough to leave quickly, enough to transport someone. The timeline was suffocatingly clear. He set the fire. He returned for Emily. He made her believe something else was inside the walls. Then he took her. Reeves requested a current trace on Evelyn Moore. A partial credit hit had been logged 3 weeks ago, gas station, outside Mobile, Alabama, which meant she was still moving, still running, or being moved. But the most disturbing discovery came from a Louisiana State Police report filed in 2019. An officer responding to a disturbance at a roadside motel noted a middle-aged man arguing with a young woman in the parking lot. The man left before identification. The officer described him as tall, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, wearing a worn firefighter jacket. Initials stitched faintly on the sleeve. C.R.
Reeves felt his pulse surge. Caleb Rourke wasn't dead. He wasn't gone. He had simply been patient. And if Emily Mercer had been alive all these years, then the 911 call wasn't a ghost reaching out from the past. It was a warning that never reached the right ears. But when Reeves finally located the motel where the disturbance occurred, he discovered something that proved this story wasn't over, because someone had checked in again just 2 nights ago under the name Caleb R. The motel sat off Highway 90, half lit by a flickering neon sign that buzzed like a dying insect. Reeves arrived just after midnight, room 27. Registered 2 nights ago under the name Caleb R. Paid in cash, no vehicle listed. The clerk said the man checked in alone, but security footage showed something else. At 1:11 a.m. the previous night, a second figure entered the room, smaller, hesitant. Reeves felt the weight of 30 years pressing down on this moment. He approached the door quietly, weapon drawn but lowered. A thin strip of light cut across the concrete from beneath the frame. He knocked once. No answer. He knocked again, slowly, 3 times. Silence.
Then movement inside, soft, measured. The same rhythm he'd heard in the enhanced 911 recording. Breathing. Reeves forced the door. It burst inward. The room was nearly empty. No luggage, no clutter. Just a bed pushed against the far wall. And in the center of the carpet, a woman sat cross-legged, staring at the drywall. Thin, pale, hair hanging loose around her face. She didn't flinch when the door opened. She didn't look afraid. She looked tired. "Emily," Reeves said carefully. Her eyes shifted toward him slowly. For a moment, something flickered behind them. Recognition, maybe, or memory.
"He said it would be quiet here," she whispered. Reeves scanned the room. The bathroom door opens. Closet empty. No sign of Rourke. "Where is he?" Reeves asked. Emily tilted her head slightly toward the wall beside the bed. "He doesn't like windows," she murmured. "He listens from inside." Reeves felt the air thin in his lungs. He stepped toward the wall, pressed his palm against it. Nothing, just drywall. But then, a faint vibration, 3 slow taps, from the other side. Reeves' heart slammed against his ribs. He motioned for backup over the radio. Officers surrounded the adjacent room within seconds. Door breached. Lights on. Empty. No furniture. No man. Just stripped carpet and exposed drywall. And near the baseboard, fresh screw marks, as if something had been recently mounted and removed. Reeves returned to Emily. She was still staring at the wall. "He told me the fire would make it stop," she said quietly, "but he just built new rooms." Reeves knelt in front of her. "You're safe now." Her expression didn't change. "He says that every time." Police searched the entire property. No trace of Caleb Rourke. No vehicle in the lot. No prints in the hallway. It was as if he had evaporated. Emily was taken into protective custody. DNA confirmed her identity within hours. Officially, she had been declared dead in 1996. Officially, the Mercer tragedy was closed. But nothing about this felt finished, because as Reeves reviewed the motel hallway footage from earlier that night, he noticed something chilling. At 12:47 a.m., while he was driving toward the location, a tall man exited room 27. He walked calmly past the front desk
And paused briefly to look directly into the security camera. He smiled, then stepped out of frame. No vehicle captured leaving, no trail, just absence. And in the final frame before he disappeared, he tapped the side of the hallway wall 3 times. Slow, measured. The same pattern, the same rhythm, the same breathing. Caleb Rourke was still out there. And somewhere, in some quiet town, there was probably another house with walls built just a little too thick. But here's the part that should keep you awake tonight. The original 911 recording was exactly 58 seconds long. 58 seconds. When the audio lab enhanced the final millisecond of the tape, there was one more sound after the line supposedly went dead. Not Emily, not Rourke. A third breath, closer to the receiver than either of them, and it didn't match any known profile. If you felt that chill crawling up your spine, you're not alone. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't the monster in the walls, it's the one listening through them. If you want more true dark investigations like this, subscribe to Canon of Darkness, where the shadows always have stories. And this one, it might not be over.